The void between stars had grown familiar to Commander HFY over the centuries of deep hibernation. Now, as the crystalline neural interfaces dissolved the sleep chemicals from her bloodstream, she felt the familiar weight of consciousness returning. The flagship Eternal Judgment hummed around her with a low frequency that indicated they were dropping out of faster-than-light travel. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally witnessed the subjugation of 17 star systems. Her second-in-command, Veltar, approached with measured steps. His scaled hide bore the ritual scars of the hegemony's most elite warriors. "We have arrived at the Sol system, Commander. All long-range sensors are active. The target world, designated Terra 3, remains in the third orbital position." HFY allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 500,000 years ago, the Galactic Hegemony had conducted what the archives called the Great Cleansing of this backwater system. The primitive bipedal creatures that had inhabited the third planet had shown disturbing signs of aggression and rapid technological development. Rather than wait for them to become a potential threat, the hegemony had made the logical choice. The orbital bombardment had been swift and thorough. Every major population center reduced to radioactive glass. The atmosphere poisoned with engineered toxins that would persist for millennia. The primitive species, who had laughably called themselves humans, had been eliminated before they could spread their violence beyond their home world. "Begin deep-range scans of the planet," HFY ordered. "I want to confirm the surface is still sterile before we proceed to the mining operations." The hegemony had returned to harvest the planet's considerable mineral wealth now that sufficient time had passed for the radiation to decay to manageable levels. What had once been a death world would now serve the greater good of the empire that had brought order to 3 galaxies. Veltar's claws clicked against his console as he input commands. The massive sensor arrays of the Eternal Judgment turned their attention to the blue-green world hanging in the darkness ahead. For several minutes, only the background hum of the ship's systems filled the command chamber. Then, Veltar made a sound HFY had never heard from him before, a sharp intake of breath that bordered on a gasp. "Commander," his voice carried an edge of confusion. "The initial scans are unusual." "Define unusual." "The planet shows extensive electromagnetic signatures, structured radio transmissions, organized light patterns on the night side that suggest cities." HFY felt her secondary heart skip a beat. "That's impossible. Run a full diagnostic on the sensor array." "Already completed, Commander. All systems are functioning within normal parameters. But the data suggests large-scale civilization across multiple continents." She moved to the primary display, her mind racing through possibilities. Perhaps some other species had colonized the world after the hegemony's departure. It would be unusual given the toxic atmosphere they had left behind, but not entirely impossible. The holographic display materialized before them, showing Terra 3 in perfect detail. The familiar continents were there, but something was wrong with the atmospheric composition readings. "Veltar, are you certain these sensors are calibrated correctly?" "Yes, Commander. The atmosphere its showing is breathable. Oxygen-nitrogen mixed with normal water vapor content. No trace of the atmospheric toxins we deployed." HFY stared at the readings, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. In 500,000 years, she had never encountered a world that had recovered from the hegemony's cleansing protocols. The engineered toxins were designed to persist in the ecosystem for millions of years. "Increase magnification on the major landmasses," she ordered. The image shifted, zooming in on what the old archives had designated as North America. What appeared on the display made her question whether they had somehow arrived at the wrong system. Vast geometric structures stretched across the landscape. Not the organic, flowing architecture favored by most advanced species, but harsh angular constructions that seemed to challenge the very sky. Lights moved in organized patterns along what could only be transportation networks. The electromagnetic signatures were growing stronger as their sensors gathered more data. "Commander," Veltar's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm detecting artificial satellites in orbital patterns around the planet. Hundreds of them. And they're larger structures. They appear to be space stations." The blood in ZYXRA's veins felt like ice. Space stations meant a spacefaring civilization. More than that, it meant a civilization advanced enough to maintain complex orbital infrastructure. "Are there any ships?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. "Scanning now. Yes, Commander. Multiple vessels detected throughout the system. Various sizes and configurations. Some appear to be engaged in what looks like mining operations on the asteroid belt and outer planets." ZYXRA closed her eyes and forced herself to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps the records had been wrong. Perhaps the cleansing had not been as thorough as reported. Perhaps some small population had survived and, over the centuries, rebuilt their civilization. But even as she considered these possibilities, she knew they were inadequate. The sophistication of what they were observing could not have developed from scattered survivors in just 500,000 years. Most species required millions of years to develop, from primitive tool use to spacefaring technology. "Open a channel to the Hegemony High Command," she ordered. "Commander, we are too far from the nearest relay station. It would take several months for a message to reach High Command, and several months more for a response." She nodded grimly. They were on their own to determine what had happened here and what it meant for the hegemony. "Set course for the planet. Maintain maximum stealth protocols. I want detailed scans of everything: orbital infrastructure, surface installations, and any vessels we encounter. But we are not to be detected." As the Eternal Judgment began its careful approach toward Terra 3, ZYXRA found herself confronting a possibility that challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. The humans were supposed to be extinct. The planet was supposed to be a sterile wasteland awaiting hegemony exploitation. Instead, they had found a thriving civilization that had somehow not only survived the unsurvivable, but had apparently flourished beyond what should have been possible. The first detailed scans of the orbital stations revealed construction techniques and materials that were unfamiliar to hegemony databases. The energy signatures from the surface suggested power generation on a scale that rivaled some of the hegemony's own core worlds. "Commander," Veltar reported, his voice tight with something that might have been fear, "I'm reading massive industrial complexes on multiple continents. The scale of manufacturing appears to be significant." ZYXRA studied the data streams flowing across her console. Whatever had happened on Terra 3, it represented something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that had been given a death sentence by the mightiest empire in known space had somehow cheated that sentence. As they drew closer to the planet, more details emerged. The cities were vast, some stretching for hundreds of kilometers. The transportation networks showed a level of organization and efficiency that spoke to advanced logistics and planning. The space-based infrastructure included not just satellites and stations, but what appeared to be construction facilities and even what might be defensive platforms. "Begin preparing detailed intelligence reports," she commanded. "Everything we observe needs to be documented. High Command needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." But even as she spoke those words, ZYXRA felt a cold certainty settling in her mind. Whatever the humans had become in the 500 millennia since their supposed extinction, they had clearly become something that the hegemony had never anticipated having to face. The Eternal Judgment continued its approach, its advanced stealth systems keeping it hidden from the inhabitants of Terra 3. But ZYXRA could not shake the feeling that they were not the hunters she had assumed them to be. They might very well be walking into the domain of something far more dangerous than the primitive species the hegemony had tried to eliminate so long ago. But the closer they approached Terra 3, the more impossible everything became. ZYXRA stood before the main display, watching streams of data that challenged every assumption she had ever held about galactic civilization. "Commander," Veltar announced from his station. We're receiving what appears to be routine communications traffic from the planet's surface. The volume is extraordinary, meaning billions of individual transmission sources, Commander. Personal communication devices, commercial broadcasts, data networks. The level of technological saturation suggests a population in the tens of billions, possibly more. Zoaxera felt her mandibles tighten involuntarily. The original human population, according to hegemony records, had been barely 3 billion when the cleansing occurred. Even accounting for natural growth over 500 millennia, these numbers were staggering. What about the content of these transmissions? Can we decode them? Veltar's claws danced over his console. The basic mathematical principles are translating, but the linguistic complexity is remarkable. Multiple languages, some appearing to be entirely artificial constructs designed for specific technical or scientific purposes. The computational requirements for their communication networks alone exceed those of most hegemony core worlds. A new voice joined the conversation from the science station. Commander, I have completed preliminary analysis of the orbital infrastructure. Chief Science Officer Nixera approached with a datapad that trembled slightly in her grasp. What I'm seeing shouldn't be possible. Explain. The material science, Commander. The orbital stations are constructed using elements and alloys that don't exist in our databases. We're seeing molecular-level engineering that suggests they can manipulate matter at the atomic level with precision that surpasses even our most advanced facilities. Zoaxthera took the datapad and scrolled through the technical specifications. The numbers made no sense according to known physics. Structural materials with strength-to-weight ratios that exceeded theoretical maximums. Energy transmission systems that operated with near-perfect efficiency. Manufacturing techniques that appeared to build objects molecule by molecule. Are we certain these readings are accurate? I've run diagnostics 17 times, Commander. Our equipment is functioning perfectly. What we're observing represents a technological base that is... Nixera paused, searching for the correct words. It's not just advanced, Commander. It's evolved along entirely different principles from galactic standard technology. On the main display, the night side of Terra 3 rotated into view. The lights that marked population centers weren't the warm yellow glow typical of most civilizations. Instead, they showed a spectrum of colors that suggested energy usage far beyond simple illumination. Focus sensors on the largest urban concentration, Zoaxthera ordered. The display zoomed in on what had once been called Tokyo in the old records. What they saw defied comprehension. The city extended not just across the surface, but deep underground and high into the atmosphere. Towers stretched kilometers into the sky, connected by transportation tubes that pulsed with moving lights. Below ground, the sensors revealed a complex three-dimensional network of tunnels, chambers, and installations that extended down for hundreds of levels. Commander, Veltar reported, the energy readings from this single urban center exceed the total power output of most hegemony colonial worlds. But it wasn't just the scale that was disturbing. It was the efficiency. Every system they observed showed optimization that bordered on perfection. No waste heat, no redundant energy pathways, no inefficient resource allocation. It was as if the entire civilization had been designed by some impossibly advanced intelligence. Scan for spacecraft departing or arriving at the planet, Zoaxthera commanded. Within moments, the sensors identified dozens of vessels of various sizes moving between Terra 3 and its orbital infrastructure. But these weren't the crude chemical rockets that the historical records indicated the humans had been developing. These ships moved without any visible propulsion, accelerating and decelerating in patterns that suggested mastery of gravitational manipulation. Commander, Nixera called from her station. I'm detecting massive installations on the far side of the planet's moon. They appear to be industrial facilities. The display shifted to show Luna, Terra 3's large natural satellite. What had once been a barren rock was now covered with geometric structures that stretched across entire crater systems. The electromagnetic signatures indicated manufacturing on a scale that boggled the mind. What are they building there? ZYXTRA asked. Unknown, Commander. But the energy requirements suggest they're working with materials that require enormous amounts of power to manipulate. Possibly exotic matter construction or antimatter production. As they continued their observations, a pattern began to emerge that filled ZYXTRA with growing unease. Every system they examined showed the same characteristics: impossible efficiency, unprecedented scale, and technological sophistication that operated on principles the hegemony didn't even understand. Commander, Veltar said quietly, there's something else. The asteroid belt shows signs of massive mining operations. Not just resource extraction, but complete dismantling of asteroids down to their component atoms. The scale suggests they're harvesting raw materials on an industrial level that could supply dozens of major civilizations. ZYXTRA studied the data flowing across her screens. The humans hadn't just survived the hegemony's cleansing. They had somehow used the intervening 500,000 years to become something that transcended normal evolutionary development. Run a comparison analysis, she ordered. Compare what we're observing here to the most advanced hegemony core worlds. The analysis took several minutes as the ship's computers processed the vast amount of data they had collected. When the results appeared, they confirmed ZYXTRA's worst fears. In terms of energy production, Terra 3's civilization outpaced the most advanced hegemony worlds by orders of magnitude. Their manufacturing capabilities exceeded anything in hegemony space. Their technological sophistication operated on principles that made hegemony science look primitive by comparison. Commander, Nixera reported, her voice barely steady. I'm detecting what appear to be defensive installations throughout the system. Energy weapons platforms, gravitational anomaly generators, and structures I can't even classify. The level of military preparation suggests they're not just aware of potential threats, they're prepared for them on a scale that could defend against entire fleets. The implications hit ZYXTRA like a physical blow. The hegemony had returned to Terra 3, expecting to find a dead world ready for exploitation. Instead, they had discovered a civilization that had not only survived their most devastating weapons, but had evolved into something that might be capable of challenging the hegemony itself. Plot a course away from the planet, she ordered suddenly. Maximum stealth, minimum energy signature. Commander, Veltar questioned. We need to maintain observation distance while we determine our next course of action. What we're seeing here changes everything. As the Eternal Judgment began to withdraw to a safer distance, ZYXTRA found herself confronting a reality that challenged the very foundation of hegemony supremacy. For millions of years, the hegemony had ruled 3 galaxies through superior technology and overwhelming force. They had eliminated potential threats before they could become dangerous and subjugated species that showed promise of advancement. But the humans had somehow slipped through those safeguards. Not only had they survived what should have been total extinction, but they had used their survival to evolve into something unprecedented in galactic history. Begin deep space monitoring protocols, she commanded. I want to know everything about their capabilities before we make any decisions about how to proceed. The ship settled into a distant orbit, its sensors trained on Terra 3 and its impossible civilization. ZYXTRA stared at the displays, showing a world that should not exist, populated by a species that should have been extinct 500,000 years ago. Whatever the humans had become during their long isolation, they represented something the hegemony had never encountered before. And as more data flowed in, showing technological capabilities that exceeded anything in known space, ZYXTRA began to suspect that the hegemony might have awakened something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. 3 days of continuous observation had only deepened the mystery of Terra 3. Each new scan revealed capabilities that should not exist, technologies that operated beyond known physical laws, and a level of civilization that challenged everything the hegemony thought it knew about intelligent life. HFY had not slept since their arrival. Instead, she stood in the observation deck, staring at the blue-green world that hung in the darkness like a jewel of impossible complexity. Behind her, the constant flow of data streams painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Commander, Nixera approached with a hesitancy unusual for the normally confident science officer. We've completed analysis of their transportation networks. The results are troubling. Show me. The holographic display materialized, showing Terra 3's surface covered with lines of light that pulsed with regular movement. But as Nixera adjusted the display parameters, the true scope became apparent. These aren't just surface transportation systems, Commander. They extend through dimensional space. The humans appear to have mastered some form of spatial folding that allows near-instantaneous travel between any 2 points on their planet. HFY felt her breathing become shallow. Dimensional manipulation was theoretical even for hegemony scientists. The energy requirements alone should have been beyond any single-world civilization. There's more, Commander. We've detected similar spatial anomalies extending beyond their planet. They appear to have transportation networks connecting Terra 3 to installations throughout their solar system. Travel time between their homeworld and their lunar facilities appears to be measured in minutes, not days. The implications were staggering. If the humans had mastered dimensional travel, they weren't limited by the conventional constraints of space and time that governed all other known civilizations. They could move personnel, materials, and potentially military assets across vast distances instantaneously. Veltar joined them, his expression grim. Commander, I've been analyzing their communication patterns. There's something you need to see. The display shifted to show electromagnetic spectrum analysis. But instead of the chaotic jumble of signals typical of most civilizations, the human communications showed a level of organization that was unsettling. They're not just communicating locally, Commander. We're detecting signals that appear to be traveling through the same dimensional channels as their transportation networks. They have instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. HFY stared at the data, her mind reeling. Instantaneous communication across light years meant the humans weren't limited to their solar system. If they had established colonies or outposts elsewhere in the galaxy, they could coordinate activities on a scale that no other civilization had ever achieved. Have we detected any evidence of human presence beyond this system? She asked. That's the problem, Commander. If they're using dimensional communication, we wouldn't be able to detect remote installations unless we were physically present in those systems. For all we know, they could have a presence throughout the galaxy, and we would never know until we encounter them directly. The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. HFY found herself contemplating a possibility that filled her with cold dread. What if the humans hadn't been contained to Terra 3? What if the last 500,000 years had given them time to spread throughout the galaxy, while the hegemony remained oblivious to their presence? Commander, a new voice called from behind them. Junior Science Officer Kixtel approached with a datapad, her movements showing the rapid breathing patterns associated with extreme stress. I've been analyzing the composition of their atmospheric modifications. Atmospheric modifications? Yes, Commander. What we initially read as natural atmosphere recovery is actually completely artificial. They've engineered their planet's entire atmospheric system. But it's not just about removing the toxins we deployed. They've optimized their atmosphere for purposes we don't understand. Kixtel handed over the datapad with trembling claws. The atmospheric composition includes trace elements that don't occur naturally. Noble gas isotopes that would require stellar-level fusion to create. Molecular structures that appear to be designed for specific electromagnetic properties. Commander, they've turned their entire planet's atmosphere into some kind of technological tool. HFY scrolled through the data, her comprehension struggling to keep pace with what she was seeing. The humans hadn't just recovered from the hegemony's atmospheric poisoning, they had replaced their entire atmospheric system with something that served purposes beyond simple biological support. What kind of purposes? Unknown, Commander. But the electromagnetic properties suggest their atmosphere might be serving as a planet-wide computational matrix, or possibly a dimensional stabilization field. The energy interactions are beyond our current understanding. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority signal from the sensor array. Veltar moved quickly to the nearest console, his expression growing increasingly alarmed as he read the data. Commander, we have a problem. I'm detecting multiple spacecraft approaching our position. From where? Unknown, Commander. They didn't approach from any direction. They simply appeared. The dimensional distortion signatures match what we've observed in their transportation networks. The main display shifted to show the tactical situation. 3 vessels of unfamiliar design hung in space approximately 1,000 kilometers from the Eternal Judgment. They had no visible propulsion systems, no apparent weapons ports, and their hulls seemed to absorb sensor beams rather than reflect them. Have we been detected? Zoextra asked, though she already suspected the answer. Our stealth systems are still active and showing normal parameters. But given their technological capabilities, it's possible they're using detection methods we don't understand. As they watched, one of the human vessels began to move. Not with the gradual acceleration typical of conventional spacecraft, but with smooth, impossible motion that seemed to ignore inertia entirely. It approached their position with deliberate intent that made clear their presence was known. Commander, Nixera reported, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the approaching vessel. Power levels that exceed our main reactor output by several orders of magnitude. Are they powering weapons? Unknown. The energy patterns don't match anything in our databases. But the scale suggests they could deploy force comparable to planetary bombardment if they chose to. Zuwaixtara felt the weight of command pressing down on her with crushing force. Every protocol in hegemony military doctrine was based on technological superiority. Standard procedure when encountering unknown civilizations was to overwhelm them with superior firepower before they could mount effective resistance. But nothing about this situation followed standard parameters. The humans possessed capabilities that made hegemony technology look primitive. Attempting to engage them militarily would likely result in the complete destruction of her ship and crew. Open a channel, she commanded. Commander? Veltar asked. If they're capable of detecting us through our best stealth systems, attempting to remain hidden is pointless. Open a standard first contact communication channel. The communications array activated, broadcasting on multiple frequencies with basic mathematical sequences designed to establish communication with unknown species. For several minutes, only silence answered their transmission. Then the reply came, and everything Zoextra thought she knew about the universe changed forever. The message arrived not through radio waves or laser communication, but directly through their dimensional communication systems that the hegemony didn't even possess. The voice that spoke was clearly artificial, translated through systems that understood their language perfectly despite never having encountered it before. Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Hegemony. We have been expecting your return for quite some time. The words hit the command crew like a physical blow. The humans not only knew who they were, but had been anticipating their arrival. More disturbing still, the casual tone suggested they viewed the hegemony not as a threat to be feared, but as something they had been prepared for. We would like to invite you to send representatives to our world for discussion. We have much to show you about what has transpired since your last visit. Zowaixtara stared at the communication console, her mind struggling to process the implications. The humans knew about the cleansing. They knew about the hegemony's attempt to exterminate them. And they were extending an invitation as if greeting old acquaintances rather than the architects of their intended genocide. The voice continued with the same unsettling calm. We understand that what you have observed may be surprising to you. There is much that has changed since you last visited our system. We believe it would be beneficial for all parties to discuss these changes in person." The transmission ended, leaving the command crew in stunned silence. The human vessels maintained their positions, clearly waiting for a response, but making no threatening moves. They projected an aura of patient confidence that was somehow more disturbing than any display of weapons would have been. ZYXTRA realized that everything had changed. They were no longer conducting reconnaissance of a potentially valuable mining world. They were now facing a civilization that not only knew their history, but possessed capabilities that challenged hegemony, supremacy itself. The decision she made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of her crew, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the galactic hegemony. The shuttlecraft that detached from the Eternal Judgment was the most advanced vessel in hegemony space, equipped with the finest diplomatic protocols and defensive systems their civilization had ever produced. As it approached the coordinates provided by the humans, ZYXTRA couldn't shake the feeling that it was pitifully inadequate for what they were about to encounter. She had chosen to lead the diplomatic mission herself, accompanied by Nixera and a minimal security detail. The decision had not been made lightly. Protocol demanded that she remain with her ship, but the unprecedented nature of this encounter required direct command authority. "Commander," Nixera reported from the science station, "the designated coordinates appear to be in low planetary orbit. I'm detecting a structure that wasn't there during our initial scans." The main display showed what appeared to be a space station that defied conventional design principles. Rather than the utilitarian corridors and chambers typical of orbital installations, this structure resembled a work of art, flowing organic curves that somehow suggested both technological sophistication and natural growth patterns. "How large is it?" ZYXTRA asked. "Approximately 50 kilometers in length, Commander. But the internal space appears to be larger than the external dimensions should allow." "That's impossible." "Yes, Commander. But the scans are consistent. They appear to have constructed this facility using the same dimensional manipulation technology we've observed elsewhere in their system." As their shuttle approached the docking coordinates, ZYXTRA found herself studying the surface of the station through the viewports. The material appeared to be some form of crystalline metal that shifted color as the light hit it from different angles. No seams or construction joints were visible, as if the entire massive structure had been grown rather than built. The docking process occurred without any input from their shuttle's pilot. Gentle gravitational fields guided their vessel into a bay that sealed around them with perfect precision. Through the viewports, they could see an environment that had been prepared for their arrival, complete with atmospheric composition matching their ship's life support systems. "Atmosphere is breathable for our species," the pilot reported. "Temperature and humidity are within comfortable ranges. They've obviously studied our biological requirements." ZYXTRA felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The humans had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. The level of advanced planning suggested surveillance and intelligence capabilities that extended far beyond the solar system. "Security teams remain with the shuttle," she commanded. "Nixera and I will proceed to the meeting location. Maintain constant communication." The airlock cycled, revealing a corridor that challenged their perception of reality. The walls appeared to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. The floor was solid, but somehow gave the impression of walking on water. Gravity was perfectly calibrated for their species, despite being different from human requirements. They were met by a single figure who appeared human at first glance, but examination revealed subtle modifications that spoke of extensive technological enhancement. The being was tall and moved with fluid grace that suggested integration of organic and artificial systems. When it spoke, the words came from the air around them rather than from visible vocal organs. "Welcome to Terra Station Alpha. I am designated as Interface 7, created specifically for communication with your species. Please follow me to the conference chamber. As they walked through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate their passage, HFY found herself overwhelmed by the casual display of technological mastery. Every surface, every system, every detail spoke of capabilities that exceeded anything in her experience. "If I may ask," she said carefully, "how did you know we would return?" Interface 7 paused, turning to regard her with eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. "Your species is predictable in certain ways, Commander HFY. The galactic hegemony has operated according to consistent patterns for millions of years. When resources are needed, you return to places you have previously cleared of potential competition." The fact that Interface 7 knew her name was disturbing enough. The casual analysis of hegemony behavior patterns was worse. It suggested the humans had been studying their former attackers for far longer than should have been possible. The conference chamber they entered defied physical laws. The space was simultaneously intimate and vast, with walls that seemed to extend into infinity while somehow remaining close enough to touch. The conference table was a single piece of material that appeared to be crystallized space itself. "Please be seated." Interface 7 gestured to chairs that formed themselves from the floor as they approached. "There is much to discuss." As they settled into seats that adjusted perfectly to their anatomy, HFY found herself facing 3 other entities that had materialized from nowhere. Each bore the same human-derived appearance as Interface 7, but with subtle variations that suggested different specializations or purposes. "You are undoubtedly wondering what happened here after your departure," one of the entities began. "The story is both simpler and more complex than you might imagine." A holographic display materialized above the table, showing Terra 3 as it had been 500,000 years ago. The planet was devastated, its atmosphere poisoned, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment. It looked exactly as hegemony records indicated it should. "Your cleansing was thorough," Interface 7 continued. 96% of our biological population was eliminated within the first decade. The atmospheric toxins rendered the surface uninhabitable for organic life. By any reasonable measure, humanity was extinct. The display shifted, showing underground installations that had survived the bombardment. Deep caverns and reinforced chambers where scattered groups of humans had managed to shelter from the devastation above. But what your analysis failed to account for was our species' fundamental nature. Humans do not simply accept extinction. When faced with impossible circumstances, we adapt, we innovate, and we survive. HFY watched as the display showed the gradual transformation that had occurred over the centuries. The survivors hadn't simply rebuilt their civilization, they had reimagined it entirely. Biological limitations were overcome through technological integration. Physical constraints were bypassed through dimensional manipulation. The poisoned atmosphere became raw material for something entirely new. The toxins you deployed were designed to persist in organic systems, another entity explained. But we redesigned ourselves to thrive in toxic environments. What was meant to kill us became the foundation of our transformation. The holographic display showed the evolutionary process in accelerated time. Humans integrating with their technology not as users, but as partners. Consciousness expanding beyond individual biological containers into collective matrices. Physical forms becoming optional rather than limiting. But the most significant change, Interface 7 said, was in our understanding of the universe itself. Facing extinction forces a species to question everything, to explore every possibility. We discovered principles of physics that your science has not yet encountered. Nixera leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. The dimensional manipulation, the atmospheric engineering, the instantaneous communication, how is any of that possible? Your species approaches technology as a tool to be wielded, one of the entities replied. We learn to become one with the fundamental forces of reality itself. Matter, energy, space, and time are not obstacles to overcome, but partners to dance with. The display shifted again, showing the expansion of human civilization beyond Terra 3, not through conventional spacecraft and colonization, but through dimensional networks that connected points across the galaxy. Installations that existed in folded space, drawing resources from multiple star systems simultaneously. You're spread throughout the galaxy, Waxthara said, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. Not throughout, Commander. We are the galaxy in ways that your language cannot easily express. Every star system you visit, every world you survey, every species you encounter, they're all connected through networks you cannot perceive. The revelation was staggering. The hegemony believed itself the dominant force in galactic civilization, but they had been operating within a framework they didn't even know existed. Humanity hadn't just survived and advanced, they had become something that encompassed the very space the hegemony thought they controlled. Why reveal this to us? ZYXTRA asked. You could have remained hidden indefinitely. Interface 7's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy. Because, Commander, the universe is about to change in ways that will affect all intelligent species. What you call the galactic hegemony has served a purpose in maintaining stability across multiple galaxies. But that era is ending. The holographic display shifted to show star charts covering regions of space far beyond what the hegemony had explored. But the charts showed not empty space, but vast structures and civilizations that operated on scales that dwarfed anything previously imagined. Other galaxies contain intelligences that make our transformation look modest by comparison. They are beginning to take notice of this region of space. The hegemony's period of dominance is about to encounter challenges that will require adaptation or face extinction. Zawakthara felt the weight of cosmic significance settling on her shoulders. The meeting wasn't just about humanity's survival and transformation. It was about the future of all galactic civilization. Were you proposing? She asked. Partnership, Interface 7 replied simply. Humanity remembers both the pain of your attack and the purpose it ultimately served. We propose to help the hegemony evolve beyond its current limitations before it encounters forces that will not be as patient as we have been. The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two vastly different futures. Zawakthara realized that her response would determine not just the fate of her mission, but the destiny of every species in their galaxy. The journey back to hegemony space took 3 months through conventional faster-than-light travel. 3 months for Zawakthara to process what she had witnessed and prepare a report that would fundamentally alter the course of galactic civilization. The data crystals secured in her personal vault contained evidence of human capabilities that would challenge everything the hegemony leadership thought they knew about the universe. During the return voyage, she had experienced the partnership Interface 7 had offered firsthand. Human design modifications to their ship systems had improved efficiency by 400%. Navigation upgrades provided by dimensional manipulation technology had reduced travel time by half. Most significantly, they now carried communication devices that could contact Terra 3 instantaneously across any distance. The Eternal Judgment emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the hegemony course system of Centauri Prime. The massive orbital installation surrounding the capital world represented the pinnacle of hegemony engineering and the seat of power for an empire that spanned 3 galaxies. As they approached the Supreme Command Station, ZYXTHRA found herself seeing familiar structures through new eyes. What had once seemed impossibly advanced now appeared quaint by comparison to what she had witnessed at Terra 3. The hegemony's greatest achievements were impressive applications of well-understood principles, while humanity had transcended those principles entirely. Commander, Veltar announced from the communication station, Supreme Command is requesting immediate priority debriefing upon our arrival. Acknowledged. Prepare all sensor logs and data recordings for presentation to the Supreme Council. As they docked at the command station, Zhuangxia carried with her not just evidence of humanity's transformation, but Interface 7's final gift, a complete technological analysis of hegemony systems and recommendations for improvement. The humans had studied their former attackers thoroughly and were prepared to share knowledge that could advance hegemony capabilities by millennia. The Supreme Council chamber was a vast amphitheater where the most powerful beings in 3 galaxies made decisions that affected trillions of lives. As Zhuangxia stood before the assembled leadership, she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Supreme Commanders, she began, the mission to Terra 3 has yielded discoveries that require immediate council attention. The assumptions underlying our return to that system were fundamentally incorrect. She activated the holographic display systems, showing the assembled data from their observations of Terra 3. The reaction from the Council was immediate and predictable. Gasps of disbelief, demands for verification, and expressions of outrage at the apparent impossibility of what they were seeing. Supreme Commander Vexthal, the ancient leader whose military campaigns had conquered 2 entire galaxies, rose from his ceremonial throne. You're claiming that the primitive species we eliminated has somehow not only survived, but achieved technological superiority over the hegemony itself. That is correct, Supreme Commander. But there is more. Zhuangxia activated the recordings from her meeting with Interface 7. The casual display of dimensional manipulation and matter transformation caused several council members to demand immediate verification of the recordings' authenticity. For 6 hours, she presented every detail of their encounter. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications were so staggering that the council struggled to accept what they were seeing. Finally, Supreme Commander Vexthal called for recess to allow private deliberation among the senior leadership. When the session reconvened, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed. The initial disbelief had given way to something more dangerous. Fear mixed with territorial aggression. The humans represent an unprecedented threat to hegemony authority, Vexthal announced. Their capabilities exceed our own by factors that make conventional military response inadequate. However, we cannot allow any species to challenge hegemony, supremacy. Zhuangxia felt a chill as she recognized the direction of the Council's thinking. Supreme Commander, the humans have offered partnership. They claim to have intelligence about threats from other galaxies that will require cooperative response. Their partnership is offered from a position of technological superiority, another council member interjected. Accepting such an arrangement would effectively acknowledge hegemony inferiority. That is unacceptable. With respect, Supreme Commander, Zhuangxia pressed forward despite the dangerous territory she was entering. Conventional military action against Terra 3 would be suicidal. Their defensive capabilities alone exceed anything we could deploy. Vexthal's mandibles clicked in the pattern that indicated final decision. Then, we will develop new capabilities. If the humans can transcend known physical limitations, so can we. All research divisions are hereby directed to reverse engineer the technologies you observed. We will match their capabilities and then exceed them. Supreme Commander, they anticipated this response. Interface 7 specifically warned that attempting to duplicate their technology without understanding its principles could be catastrophic. They evolved their capabilities over 500,000 years of careful development. Are you suggesting the hegemony is inferior to a species we once reduced to near extinction? The question carried deadly implications. Zhuangxia realized she stood at a crossroads that would determine the fate of both civilizations. She could support the Council's decision to pursue technological competition with humanity, likely leading to catastrophic conflict. Or she could activate the communication device Interface 7 had provided and attempt to establish real-time contact with Terra 3. Supreme Commander, I request permission to establish direct communication with the human representatives. They may be willing to share developmental principles rather than requiring us to reverse engineer their technology. The council chamber fell silent as Vexthal considered the request. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Very well. Establish communication. But make it clear that the hegemony negotiates from a position of strength, not supplication. Zoextra activated the communication device, and, within seconds, Interface 7's voice filled the council chamber with perfect clarity. Greetings, Supreme Council of the Galactic Hegemony. We have been monitoring your deliberations through quantum resonance patterns. We understand your concerns and are prepared to address them directly. The casual admission that they had been under surveillance sent shock waves through the assembled leadership. The humans hadn't just been waiting for contact, they had been listening to supposedly secure council discussions. You dare spy on the Supreme Council? Vexthal demanded. Not spying, Supreme Commander. Observation. Your quantum communication networks broadcast on frequencies that intersect with dimensional channels we commonly use. Privacy in your sense requires technologies you do not yet possess. The implications were staggering. If human technology could monitor hegemony communications without detection, then they had access to every military plan, every strategic decision, every technological secret the Empire possessed. Interface 7 continued with the same unsettling calm. We understand your desire to maintain autonomy and strength. We do not seek to diminish the hegemony's authority within its traditional sphere of influence. What we offer is expansion of capabilities to meet challenges that threaten all galactic civilization. What challenges? Vexthal asked, though his tone remained hostile. The chamber's holographic display activated without any input from hegemony systems, showing star charts that extended far beyond known space. What appeared were vast structures that dwarfed galaxies themselves, moving through intergalactic space with obvious intelligence and purpose. Entities from regions of space so distant that light from their point of origin has not yet reached your galaxy. They operate on scales that make our transformation appear modest. They are aware of the increasing organization of intelligence in this region and are beginning to take interest. The display zoomed in to show details that challenge comprehension. Structures that encompassed entire star clusters. Energy signatures that indicated manipulation of matter on galactic scales. Technology that appeared to treat space-time itself as raw material. How long before they arrive? Zwaxtera asked. In your terms, approximately 50,000 years. More than enough time for preparation. But only if that preparation begins immediately and proceeds along principles that transcend current limitations. Supreme Commander Vexthal stared at the holographic display, his expression shifting through rage, fear, and, finally, grudging acceptance of reality. What exactly are you proposing? Gradual integration of hegemony civilization with expanded technological principles. Not submission or conquest, but evolution. Your species' administrative and organizational capabilities combined with transcendent technologies could create something capable of meaningful response to what approaches. The offer hung in the chamber air like a bridge between two possible futures. One path led to desperate attempts at technological competition that would likely end in conflict and mutual destruction. The other offered transformation into something capable of facing challenges beyond current imagination. Zwaxtera watched as Supreme Commander Vexthal made the decision that would determine the course of galactic history. We will consider your proposal, he said finally. But understand that the hegemony will not simply surrender its authority to any species, regardless of their capabilities. Authority shared is authority multiplied, Supreme Commander. We propose not to take your empire, but to help it become something worthy of what approaches from the darkness between galaxies. The communication ended, leaving the council chamber in contemplative silence. Zwaxtera realized that her mission to Terra 3 had accomplished far more than anyone had anticipated. Instead of returning with reports of a dead world ready for exploitation, she had opened dialogue between two civilizations whose partnership might determine the survival of all galactic intelligence. As the council began formal deliberations on humanity's proposal, HFY found herself hoping that wisdom would prevail over pride. The alternative was too catastrophic to contemplate. In the end, the hegemony's choice would determine whether the galaxy's future would be written through cooperation or catastrophe. And somewhere in the depths of space, entities beyond current comprehension continued their inexorable approach toward a region of space that was only beginning to understand how small it truly was in the vast cosmos.